The attack on Pearl Harbor is acknowledged as one of the most unexpected and successful military attacks in naval and aerial combat. It was one of the first on U.S. soil. The day was also known as a day that will live in infamy. After the attacks on Pearl Harbor, the fear and suspension that followed would have severe consequences on Japanese Americans, and they would face incarceration, racial discrimination, and bias through the end of World War II and beyond. The attack on Pearl Harbor directly caused America's entry into World War II, which ultimately led to the launch of the atomic bombs on Hiroshima and Nagasaki in May of 1945. Prior to the attack, the Japanese sunk a boat named the USS Penne that was rescuing the U.S. and Chinese civilians fleeing from Japanese invaders attacking Nanking, China. Along with many other events, all this tension rose up and eventually caused the attack on Pearl Harbor, and the United States entering into World War II. Military leaders were not expecting an attack so close to home, so Pearl Harbor was mostly undefended. The Japanese attacked Pearl Harbor in hopes the United States would accept defeat, and the Japanese would have a fortress that would have stretched across the whole Pacific Rim. The attack took place in Pearl Harbor, Honolulu, Hawaii, just before 8 o'clock on Sunday, December 7, 1941. On the day of the attack, the USS Lexington, Saratoga, and Enterprise were spared because they were out on missions that were delayed by weather conditions. Lots of memorable events happened on the day of Pearl Harbor, a day that will live in infamy. There were also many lives lost and families impacted. My great-grandfather, who was there on the day of the attack, remembers he was called in early in the morning to station. He and his neighbor raced to the airfield where their watchtower was. Once to the tower, they saw the ships in flames. Some were trying to fight back, but the Japanese element of surprise was too great. Torpedoes hit the USS Oklahoma with 400 sailors aboard. Men on all of the ships who were stationed in the masts of the ship had a choice to either jumping and trying to clear the deck or staying and burning alive. Lots of men jumped, but only a handful made it. The entire USS Arizona was engulfed in flames. An 1,800-pound bomb was dropped through the deck of the USS Arizona and exploded its magazine with over 1,000 sailors aboard. Anyone who survived the explosion was forced to jump into the burning water of fuel and oil. Soon, as the USS Oklahoma was capsized, after the attack, America was in shock, and just the next day, President Franklin D. Roosevelt declared war on Japan and stated that the day is a day that will live in infamy. To counter Japan, they implemented trade embargoes in hopes of stopping Japan from using lots of their vehicles. In that case, they wouldn't be able to fight for long. The Japanese that were living in the United States faced severe consequences and racial discrimination following the attacks on Pearl Harbor. Hours after the attack on Pearl Harbor, the FBI arrested 1,291 Japanese Americans. John DeWitt originally came up with the idea of military zones because he believed the population needed to be taken control of. The internment camps were established by Franklin D. Roosevelt through Executive Order 9066. Order 9066 was issued on February 19, 1942. This order authorized the evacuation of all persons deemed a threat to national security from the West Coast to relocation centers further inland. Over 120,000 Japanese Americans were affected by the internment camps. The rule is that if you were 116 Japanese, you would be evacuated from your home. The Japanese Americans living in the U.S. had 6 days to dispose of anything they couldn't carry. They were tagged to indicate the location at the assembly centers. If labeled as descendants, they would have been transferred to special camps in Tule Lake, California. Some of the main internment camps were located in California, Washington, and Oregon. In March of 1946, Order 9066 was repealed, and Congress issued a formal apology and gave $20,000 to over 80,000 Japanese Americans as reparations. The Japanese Americans living in the United States today still face some of the same problems they did when the internment camps were ended along with the war. Since the USS Arizona was never salvaged, it forms a tomb for the men that were trapped in the rooms inside the ship. My great-grandfather earned the Combat Commendation Medal for outstanding devotion to duty under fire. To this day, there's a memorial built over the USS Arizona, and also a list of names of the people who lost their lives during the attack. The attack on Pearl Harbor ultimately changed America's views on immigrants in the country for many years to come. This leaves the pondering that maybe if the attack never happened, would the U.S. still have eventually entered into the war?